Hello and welcome to the AAPEX webinar series. My name is Kelly Denman and I'm with AAPEX Event Management. The webinar series will host one webinar per month leading up to our in-person event in Las Vegas. AAPEX will take place at the Venetian Expo and Caesars Forum from Tuesday, November 5th through Thursday, November 7th, 2024. In preparation for the event, be sure to visit apexshow.com for all event details. As a friendly reminder, attendees' mics will be muted for the duration of this webinar. You will be able to submit Q&A throughout the webinar, and if time is available, we will have that at the end of the presentation. This webinar will also be recorded and available later this week at apexshow.com. Today's webinar is Future of EV with the Current Headwinds, and it is my pleasure to introduce our presenter, Akshay Singh, partner at PwC Strategy. Ann, take it away.
Thank you, Kelly. Hello, everyone. Very nice to meet you all. Looking forward to the discussion today. Just a quick introduction. My name is Akshay Singh. I'm a partner at PwC Strategy and in the automotive practice. I've been in consulting for over 13 years, worked with OEMs, tier one suppliers, and aftermarket companies on strategy and operations related projects. And prior to PwC Strategy, and I spent around 13 years in the automotive industry. So just wanted to start with what the EV landscape look like today, right? Obviously, there was a lot of excitement about EVs in 2019, 2020, 2021. We saw a steady growth in EV penetration in the US. But as you all know, and you may have heard and read that the market is experiencing some slowdown. By the way, when we actually presented our point of view, and we even presented some of it during the AAPEX show in Las Vegas for the last few years, we expected this. So this is what we were essentially forecasted. So our forecast has not changed. In this presentation, I would like to actually talk about the drivers, how the different drivers are trending, and then what essentially, where do we expect the market to be in the next 5 to 10 years, right? So if you look at the EV penetration in the US, yes, it has steadily increased from 2.6% 2019 to 7.7% 2030. Quite a bit of growth. But if you look at the last quarter, the sales declined a bit, right? In the US, right, also when we talk about EV penetration, it varies significantly by state across US. The way we cannot say that, hey, it's over 8% penetration, but 8% penetration is not uniform, right? The way we actually look at US market is there are zero emission vehicle states and then the non-ZEV states. California is also a zero emission vehicle state, and zero emission vehicle states account for around 36% of the all US light duty sales. And if you look at like California is obviously way ahead of rest of the states, almost already at closer to 23-24% penetration, is about 21% penetration in 2023. The zero emission vehicle states were already at 12% or so, but if it's the non-ZEV states, right, they are almost less than 5% or so, right? And the reason being that the factors that are driving EV penetration in the US and even across regions, right, globally, those factors are different. They trend different, and I'll talk about some of the factors are, but there are quite a bit of differences across states. And so that's when you talk about the US, you actually have to talk about what the penetration is in California is, what the situation in zero emission vehicle states is, and what the situation in non-ZEV states is. Now, globally, EV sales continue to increase across regions. China is growing the fastest, followed by US, but EU is growing the slowest. But penetration in EU is already at 16%, and the reason being that the dynamics of some of the factors that are driving the growth are different. But all of the regions are experiencing some sort of slowdown, right? Because there are a lot of early adopters who have purchased EVs, but the question is, can you actually get to the next level of customers or not, right? Now, in addition to BEVs, hybrid electric vehicles are also gaining traction with across US and EU. I don't have a chart on China, but in China also there's quite a bit of adoption of hybrid electric vehicles. And we think at least in the short term, right? I mean, we'll see um, increase in penetration of, especially plug-in hybrids. If more plug-in hybrids are offered, right? There are not many plug-in hybrids. In the US, is only around 2% or so. It's just because there are not many models for consumers to choose from, right? I mean, that's the case you can say for battery electric vehicles also, but especially for PHEVs, there are not many models for consumers to choose from, right? Now, when we look at the EV penetration, right, in North America, it's continued to be driven by adoption in the luxury market. That's not a surprise. And then essentially most of the market is Tesla. Tesla account for more than 55% of the total total sales in the US. Most of the models that are available for consumers to choose from are within the luxury segments. Most of the models, and I'll show you actually a chart later on that most of the models that are offered to the consumers are actually more than 50-60 thousand dollars, right? So consumers have, like, most of the market is actually less than $45,000 vehicle, but those, there are not many vehicles for consumers to choose from. So until unless there are more models available for the consumers, more affordable models available for the consumers, we won't see significant adoption, right? And there are various factors that would drive the cost of EVs, right? We'll talk about that a little bit. So how do we look at, like, what are the different demand and supply side drivers, right? Okay, what is really driving the what is really driving EV adoption, right? So we look at both the demand side drivers and the supply side drivers, right? We heard OEMs, right? They were saying a couple of years ago that, hey, we want all our sales to be EVs, right? It doesn't matter what the OEMs want. It's, what matters is what consumers want, right? I mean, whether you can actually convince the consumers to buy an EV, whether can you convince the consumers, can you offer enough, affordable models to the consumers to choose from. So if you look at the EV adoption drivers, number one, in our opinion, is the vehicle economics. And what I mean by vehicle economics is not only the first cost of the vehicle, but also total cost of ownership. That includes, residual value, fuel, insurance cost, and all of that, right? And we believe that once you actually achieve some level of parity, and also, some level of parity in the initial cost, that's when you will see probably a tipping point, right? Regulations play a huge role. Regulation impact economics to a certain extent. We see that, in countries like Norway, where EV penetration is more than 80% or so, closer to 85%, is just because the economics work, right? It's very, very expensive to own an ICE vehicle in Norway compared to electric vehicle, compared to ICE vehicle, right? Then it is the models available, whether there are enough models for consumers to choose from, enough affordable models for consumers to choose from. And that's going to change because OEMs are planning to introduce, a lot of models in the next 5 to 10 years, right? And then it's consumer behavior around range anxiety, familiarity with charging providers, uh, whether consumers are willing to wait for 15 minutes to charge their vehicle when they are actually taking longer trips, and then the availability of charging infrastructure. And it is charging infrastructure, the availability of charging infrastructure is limited. There is investment being made, but not enough. I believe that's not enough, and we'll talk about that a little bit, right? I'll go in detail what I mean by not enough investment is being made, right? So anyway, these are the different factors that demand and supply side that really drive EV adoption, right? And I'll talk about each of them, and then, I'll give you a number in the end, like where we believe the market is going to be in by 2030. But as I talk about different drivers, how they are trending, you can make up your own mind as well, right? So now look at the cost of the vehicles, right? So the average vehicle transaction prices in US, have been rising. they have declined, even though they have declined, from its peak. Now it's around $47,000. I think it had declined by like 5% or so. Uh, and there have been some price cuts by EV makers, but EVs are still more expensive, 15-20% more expensive than ICE vehicles. And depending on what model you are looking at, right, this number can go up to like 40% or so, right? And that is a big determinant. So the cost of the vehicle has to come down. And the reason for cutting the prices is just because there are like dealers are holding for certain models more than 100 days of inventory, and that's why there are more incentives available. So even after those incentives, price cuts, the EVs are still much more expensive than ICE vehicles. Now, the vehicle transaction prices actually went went up quite a bit. They have declined, but they'll decline further, right? And this is, I'm talking about the ICE vehicles, right? And this price delta will widen in 2024 as dealers see the new inventory pile up, and that will result in lower transaction prices. And then you see that industry norm is around 60 days of supply. It went down to, during COVID, almost less than 30 days. In April 2024 is already closer to 81 days, right? And you see some of the models here, or brands here, what kind of incentives they are offering, right? So there are quite a bit of incentives that are being offered that are going to reduce the price, increase the price delta between ICE and EV, and that's going to have an implication on ICE, on EV adoption. Again, even there is a price cut, there's still a considerable difference between so say Tesla Model 3 and the mass market ICE competitors, right? So now, if you look at overall demand, right, in the US, right, and what we did was we wanted to see like what the price volume curve looks like, right? So we kind of took the transaction prices, and this is a directional analysis. This is not the perfect curve, but it kind of give you a sense of what kind of price consumers are willing to pay for, where the market lies, and what kind of models are EV models are available for the consumers to choose from in the market. Now, if you look at on the left-hand side, overall, 45% of the demand lies below $45,000 vehicles, but only 14% of the current EV models, this is by count, right, serve this market. There are more than 30% of the EVs are at $80,000, and that's only like 2% of the market, right? So that's why there are not enough models for consumers to choose from. Not enough models are offered under 45K, and even like there are some models that are offered at 30,000. But if you compare them to, and those are like probably a B segment vehicle, but if you compare them to say another $30,000 ICE vehicle, and that ICE vehicle is much bigger, and it's more room for the consumers, right? So that's why I think it's very important, right, for automakers to actually introduce vehicles that are affordable, right, and it remains to be seen, like what happens in the next few years or so. Um, Now, one other thing that is destroying total cost of ownership of EVs when it compares to ICE is the residual value, and that's create further deterrence to EV adoption for average buyers. Now, what's happening is that EV makers are discounting. On a lot of EV models, there are price cuts that essentially has destroyed the residual value, right? And that has a big impact, right? Because average consumers is worried, like, hey, okay, if I instead of buying, probably I would lease, but even the lease terms I'm going to get today are going to be different than what the lease terms I can get like in the next couple of years, right? So because there are price cuts, and of course technology is changing as well, right? And you can see like on the left hand side, ICE versus residual value on the right hand side, EV versus ICE pickup truck, and we kind of looked at just F-150 and um, F-150 Lightning. The second year, residual value is all, you know is 25, it's 27% loss of value versus only 11% for say F-150, right? So that is having a profound impact on EV adoption. Now, one of the things is that, okay, there are a lot of subsidies, available for the consumers to choose from. But when we actually do our analysis, like, and for any technology to have a long-term penetration, it should be self-sustainable, right? Um, and subsidies do help, and they are helping. Like, even after subsidies, the penetration is not where it needs to be. It's just because not every model qualifies for subsidies. But if you think about subsidies, right, there are, if you look at the Inflation Reduction Act, there's around 36 billion, roughly $36 billion available for EV credits, right? And if you give $7,500 per car, that's only good for 4.8 million vehicles, right? Over 10 years, right? I mean, that's not enough, right? So, and if you think of like if total vehicle sales in the US are closer to 16 million vehicles, and if you give subsidies of say even like $7,500 subsidy on to 10 million vehicles, right? That's like $75 billion a year. Like, that's not sustainable. That's not going to happen. And subsidy, that's why subsidies are going to go away. That has happened in Europe, and that has also happened in China, right? So technology has to be self-sustainable. That means the technology cost has to actually come down, right? And even the government has recognized this challenge to EV adoption, as evident from the latest emission standard. So, current administration, wanted, I think their target was closer to 50% penetration, but based on the, new proposed rule, the current pathway is like with penetration of 31 to 44%, right, depending on how many PHEVs you are able to sell. And that's why there's quite a bit of focus on PHEVs from automakers. But even this target is very, very stringent, right? I don't think I don't think automakers will be able to actually meet this one, right? So, remains to be seen how they are going to actually sell the vehicles in California, and how do they actually meet this proposed standard. Again, this is still a proposal, right? So it does not become a rule. So, now, the battery prices. So one of the things that impact vehicle economics or cost of the vehicle is actually our battery prices. The battery prices are coming down. They have come down substantially in the last decade. It actually went up a little bit from 2021 to 2022 because of supply chain constraints and high raw material prices. Um, um, but in 2023, it has come down, right? But it hasn't come down a lot, right? And there's a big difference in the cost of a battery between US and China and Europe. And China, you see that China on an average is around 126 kilowatt per hour, almost 10% less than US, because it's also like most of the Chinese manufacturers are using LFP chemistry. That kind of helps lower the prices, because LFP cells are around 32%, almost 30% cheaper than lithium and NMC cells, right? So if the prices for the battery prices has to come down for automakers to, for them to reduce the cost of the vehicle, right? So, now, one of the things is that if you look at where the battery, there's a lot of money in the IRA Act, and that is kind of promoting the investment of battery cell manufacturing in the US. And a lot of plants have come online and have been proposed by automakers in the US, right? But those are cell manufacturing. But if you look at, there are four major materials that go in an EV battery cell. This is lithium, nickel, cobalt, and manganese. Most of the production, say, for lithium is in Australia, almost 47%. But if you look at where the processing is, like most of the processing is done in China. Same is for nickel, same is for cobalt. Cobalt is another challenge because more than almost 78% of it comes from Democratic Republic of Congo, and then almost 60% of it is processed in China, right? So China has most of the processing capacities, and that kind of could be a bottleneck, right? And that's also actually drive the price differences between China and US and Europe, right? So and that's a major concern, that if there is any event or geopolitical event, the prices of some of these materials could go up, resulting in higher prices of battery cells. And that means higher cost of the vehicle. That means like lower EV adoption, right? Now, what about the number of models, right? So again, this is just proposed. OEMs are expected to launch more than 1,000 models across the globe by 2030. And again, these are just announced models. I believe that some of the plans will change, but again, in the next 5 to 10 years, if these models come, are launched, then consumers will have a lot more models to choose from that would help drive EV adoption. But the question is whether these models can be introduced at affordable prices, right? The battery prices are coming down. We expect the prices to be around $100 per kilowatt hour by 27, 28. If that happens, then obviously these vehicles could be a lot more affordable. And also, as I said, like going forward, mix of standard EVs is expected to increase. So more mass market models for the consumers to choose from, both in sedans and SUVs. Now, when it comes to um, consumer behavior, right? We, if you look at like what were the three most important factors for EV buyers to purchase an electric vehicle, it was performance, right? If you compare the ICE versus EV product is better, right? I mean, it's a great performance, great acceleration, obviously has, reduced maintenance, right? And it's environment friendly and sustainable, right? But if you look at like why um, buyers are not really decided not to actually purchase an electric vehicle, is just because of, and this is a survey that was done by PwC Strategy, and it's the battery range, it's non-availability of charging infrastructure, it's the upfront cost, right? I mean, so those are the major issues, right? Major concerns of non-EV buyers, and that's why those need to be addressed. And then also when it comes to charging time, right? There are only 25% of the non-EV buyers who are willing to wait more than 30 minutes for a charge. And EV buyers are more proficient because you get used to it. But again, it's for some EV skeptics or people who own ICE vehicles, right? It takes time to actually convert them. It's just because it takes you 20-25 minutes to fully charge your vehicle. Most of the charging will be done at home, obviously overnight. But when you are, taking longer trips, then you know um, EV buyers don't want to wait for more than 30 minutes, right? So, and I believe that they probably are willing to wait for 10-15 minutes, not more than 10 minutes, right? And also, if you look at almost 35% of the US population actually lives in multifamily homes. Almost 50% don't have access to garages, so cannot really rely on residential charging. That's why public charging infrastructure is very important, right? And availability of fast chargers, right? So um, again, I talked about that. It's driving experiences is continues to be the top factor. And this is the survey of the EV owners, right? And what are the main issues that EV owners are facing, like long charging time, lack of public charging infrastructure, limited range. And I was reading at Automotive News, one of the surveys that came out that 40% of the EV owners would consider switching back to ICE vehicles So that's a big issue for the EV penetration. Now we talk about the EV infrastructure. It will play a major role in enabling EV penetration. OEMs and charge point operators are making the investment, but not enough. Like if you look at, there are three major networks like EVgo, Electrify America, and Tesla, right? And what we did was we took a charge point station and just built a like 200-mile radius circle, and then you can see the coverage, right? EVgo and Electrify not great coverage. Tesla obviously has a great coverage, but but it's not enough, right? So and that's a substantial concern concern for the industry. Now, if you look at like how many chargers do you need, right? I mean, it's just based on say 30% penetration. There are around, I think, $25,000 25,000 fast chargers today, and you need almost 130,000 fast chargers by 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 2030, right? So substantial investment is needed. There is investment that's being made, but I believe not enough. Like more investment needs to be done. And sometimes what's happening is even if there is an approved investment for a certain site, the utilities are taking almost 1 to 2 years to get a site ready, um, you know, for the CPOs to install infrastructure, right? So that is having a substantial delay or substantial impact on EV penetration. No, and as I said, like there are new chargers that are being installed, but not enough, right? There are currently around 36,000 chargers, and if you look at like 2022, there were 6,000 chargers that were installed. 2023, 9,000 chargers were installed. So yes, there is more and more chargers are being installed, but not enough, right? Now, there are challenges with charging infrastructure as well, right? So one of the issues with charging infrastructure is the high capital investment. It is a very challenging business. High upfront capex. If you install just a one 350 kilowatt charger, right, the hardware cost is already almost like $95,000, right? And there is an installation cost, and then there's an operating cost, right? And that has, so that's why a lot of the CPOs were actually making investment and installing some of these chargers at at whatever the site they can find, but they are more, I would say, prudent in terms of where they are installing chargers. Like wherever they can expect higher utilization, that's where they are. Those are the sites they are choosing, and that's why they're not enough investment is being made, right? Now, there's quite a bit of money in the NEVI. There's a NEVI funding. There's $5 billion for states to build a nationwide EV charging network by 2026. I can tell you that the slow rollout has been very slow. Texas has, for example, 400 million. California has around almost close to 400 million, right? There are certain requirements for NEVI funding. So there are certain corridors that are designated for the installation of charging infrastructure. Um, in order to qualify for funding, it needs to be an open network. There should be at least four chargers, 100 and more than 150 kilowatt port. Um, so there's investment being made. Government has provided a lot of funding, but one is that there are a lot of utilities that they are not able to actually get a site ready on time. Um, um, and even after some of these subsidies, the economics are challenging. So I believe that there are more investment that needs to be made if more subsidies are needed, and I believe that because the vehicle costs are coming down anyways, the more investment should be made in EV infrastructure than in vehicle subsidies, right? So because this is a big deterrent right now. Um, And we see that, like, even though there is a market this was introduced a couple of years ago, the market has yet to see significant impact. And you see some of the clippings from the news article, right? It's just the rollout has been very, very, very slow, right? So now, as I talked about, like, because of these factors, the charging economics look very, very challenging. Um, just to break even, right? If the company gets like 20% or 50% funding, um, just to break even at 50 cents per kilowatt hour, the CPOs have to run their network at 15% utilization. A few years ago, it was less than 7. The overall utilization of the chargers have improved. It's now over 11 or 12%. It's just because they are not installing as many chargers, right? And very careful or about very prudent about where CPOs deploy some of those chargers. That means that rollout of chargers have been slow, and some of the chargers not available at locations where, uh, even though the consumers are going, but there's not as much traffic, right? And that's a concern for the consumers, right? So again, I mean, this is very challenging. The economics are very challenging. The vehicle economics are challenging, but even the charging infrastructure economics are very challenging as well. So again, based on this, we expect the penetration to be around 30% or so by 2030. For it to happen, I think first the vehicle costs have to come down and we expect that to happen 27, 28. If that does not happen, then you're going to see even lower penetration. But if the vehicle costs come down substantially, and then what we will see is like vehicle costs come down 28, 29, and then more, there will be more investment in infrastructure. When that's ready and advancements of battery technology, then you would see a very steep curve, right? I mean, you would see, if you reach 30% penetration by 2030, then you would see substantially higher penetration by 2035, because that means that some of the consumer concerns have been addressed. There are more affordable models for consumers to choose from. It takes less time to actually charge your vehicles, and there is wide availability of charging infrastructure, right? So, but again, right now, over the next 5 years, 7 years or so, we don't expect the market to be more than 30%. So with that, these are some of the content I have. Happy to take the questions from the audience.
Sure, we actually have a few questions. The first one is, how will OEMs address the consumer issues with rapid EV depreciation and increased repair costs, especially with minor accidents? Perhaps extended warranties?
Yeah, I mean, so if you look at the repair cost, right? So the repair costs are mostly, if there is a collision, right, it's a very, very high repair cost, right? I mean, that's not going to be covered by warranty. And one of the reasons for high repair cost is because of the new technologies that are being used by some of the OEMs, like giga casting, right? So if you have a because of the use of giga casting, right? So if there's a minor collision, right, then you have to actually replace a big chunk of vehicle, right? That actually adds to the cost, right? So some of the OEMs are actually looking at different technology. I saw that even I was in China a few weeks ago, that yes, they are using bigger castings to reduce the cost of the vehicle, because they don't want like too many parts, right? But instead of using really mega casting, right, I mean, they are reducing the size, right? So that's one of the things OEMs are looking at. And that's going to happen, right? Because repair, if there is a collision, there's a that it's very, very expensive. That means your insurance cost is very high. That means your total cost of ownership is very high, right? So
That's great. And then another question. China EVs are rapidly increasing market share in the EU, even with tariffs. Now they are producing in Mexico. How long do you think it will be before China starts penetrating the US market through partnerships with other OEs, production in the US or other?
So I think EU, they are, as I said, like I was in China for, for the Chinese, for the Beijing Auto Show, and it was, I was just so surprised to see um, so many affordable models, right? There are vehicles that are available for $35,000 and really good vehicles with great content, right? I don't know how quality wise whether how those vehicles are, but in terms of user experience, in terms of the cost of the vehicles, they are just unbelievable, right? So they are, but the question is whether they are able to make money or not, because in China they are like almost more than 100 EV companies, and all of them are after going after market share. So I don't think they are making any money. Only I would say only few like BYD and few others are making money, and but they have very efficient vehicle. They are producing them more efficiently, and I would say that BYD is already selling a lot of vehicles in Europe and also in Africa, and I think they want to focus on Europe right now, but I think it's just a matter of time before they expand into the US, right? And we already see that some of the OEMs are looking to actually build factories. Chinese OEMs looking to build factories in Mexico. It's not to actually, they say that it's to serve the Mexican market. No, but it's to actually serve the US market, right? So, but I believe the first Europe and then eventually they will actually come to the US, and there will be tariffs, right? I mean, there will be tariffs for the supply from if they supply from China, but if they are producing locally, then obviously they won't be, right? So, but again, I mean, one other thing is that they have several hurdles to cross, right? So one is that what's their brand recognition, right? Whether US consumers would buy Chinese vehicles or not, right? I mean, there are some already available and which are very affordable, right? Like if you look at the Vietnamese manufacturer VinFast, right? They have very affordable model, but they have very limited penetration. It's just because of the brand recognition, and still, U.S. consumers don't believe that those are quality vehicles.
Okay, and then in question to that point, how do you think the new tariff 301 for EV 100% vehicles will affect the market?
Come again?
How do you think the new tariff 301 or 301 for EV 100% vehicles will affect the market?
So I have not looked at the details of the full 301 tariff. I'll have to go ahead and study that, but I can tell you, right? Okay, if you already see like a lot of the EVs, right? Um, a lot of the EVs there are only 10 models that actually qualify for subsidies, right? It's just because most of the EVs, the government is promoting local content, right? And more OEMs actually are looking to produce some of these vehicles locally. So again, eventually, if, as I said, like cost of the vehicle is a concern. If if you increase the cost by another 30-40%, is going to have a huge impact, right? So the focus has to be on keeping the cost down and producing locally, right? If there are tariffs, then it's going to make the vehicle even more expensive, right? And that's going to have a significant impact on EV penetration. So.
Okay, a lot of questions filling in, so that's great. We'll kind of hop on a couple different subjects here. The next question is, why does the charging network matter? Can't a driver use multiple networks on a trip?
Yes, you can, but when I talk about the charging network, I'm talking about in aggregation, right? I'm not talking about EVgo charging network or Tesla charging network or Electrify America charging network, right? I'm talking about the charging network as a whole, right? and there are just not enough chargers available, right? So even like if you look at like some of the chargers that are available at very popular sites, if you go and see, like a lot of the chargers are occupied, right? Because it's, I mean, more investment is needed, right? Again, as I said, right, most of the consumers will charge their vehicle at home, right? If you have a charger at home, if you're not taking longer trips, you're going to charge your vehicle at home. 80% of the charging will be done at home because it's going to be more economical to actually charge your vehicle at home. You're going to pay, if you charge it overnight, you're going to pay 10, 11, 12 cents per kilowatt hour versus, the price is already 50 cents per kilowatt hour, right? At external network, and it's going to go even higher, right? So it's going to be more economical to charge a vehicle at home. But as I said, more than 35% of the US population doesn't have, lives in multifamily homes, and almost 50% doesn't, they don't have access to garages, right? So when I said the public charging network, I talked a little bit about, the charging network on the highways, but you also need charging network, you know, which is in your local community, right? Which is nearby, like at places like Whole Foods or Walmart, right? Um, so more chargers are needed. I don't think there are enough chargers for consumers to choose from. So when I am talking about the charging network, I'm talking about the charging network as a whole. I'm not just talking about uh, one CPO or the other, or another CPO.
Okay, and with new battery technology, how concerned are dealers on EV used car sales?
There is a big concern, and I talked to a few dealers, and there is a big concern. They are not actually taking, you know, used EVs, right? It's tough to sell them, right? So one is just because the OEMs are cutting the prices, that has impact on the residual value of an EV, right? So and then the second is, there's not a huge change in battery technology. I would say that still most of the OEMs are actually introducing either LFP or NMC chemistries. There are some other chemistries that OEMs are looking at, or the solid state technologies that OEMs are looking at, but those are further down the road, right? But the two major chemistries are still LFP and NMC, right? So, but because of the price cuts, and there are increases, like even if there are the battery technology, there's not huge change in battery technology. There are changes in vehicle architecture, whether it's a 400-volt system or 800-volt system, how fast you can actually charge the batteries, right? That has an impact, right? So, and that is impacting the used vehicle market, right? So especially when it comes to EVs.
Okay, and is there data showing the percentage of households that only own EVs and ICEs, or only ICE?
I don't have that right now, but most of the people who are actually buying EVs, I mean, it's buying as a second vehicle, that I can say, but I don't have the data, but that's something we'll probably look at. So,
Sure, and back to batteries. Would a better understanding of battery health help with used EV residual values?
um, I think there are technologies available now which actually can check the health of a battery. There are many companies that actually are offering it. Obviously, that was a big concern, what the health of the battery is. That has an impact on residual value. So that is needed. And there are many companies now actually are offering that, and that has an impact on residual value, because if a battery is only, say, 80% or 70, 70% capacity and left of original capacity, that is going to have an impact, right? Now, when it comes to battery technology, one thing I did not talk about, right? I mean, battery health, and where battery health is going to become very, very important is some of the OEMs, and especially in China, I saw that um, are introducing technology like cell to chassis, right? So most of the batteries today you see in a vehicle, you have a battery, you have a battery tray, and the battery tray, there are multiple battery packs, what you call them in battery module, and those modules actually make a pack. Now there is something called cell to chassis architecture, right? And that has substantially lower cost. And a lot of the OEMs are introducing it. Actually, Tesla has already introduced it on one of the Model Ys or Model 3s, and to address the cost of the vehicle. You cannot really replace a module, right? Because there are no modules. If the battery goes bad, then you actually have to replace the entire battery, right? But the battery degradation is substantially lower than battery degradation in a module-based structure, right? If more and more of that architecture is introduced and some of the OEMs are looking at it, then battery check is going to become, health check is going to become even more important, even more important. It's just because if you're not able to actually correctly check the health of the battery, during the second transaction, right, then you won't be able to actually attribute the right value to the vehicle, right? And if the battery is only at 50% capacity, then you will have to actually replace the entire battery, right? That's going to have a substantial impact on the residual value, right? So it also depends on what kind of architecture is being used by an OEM in a vehicle. So I believe that it's going to become even more important, right? It is important right now, but it's going to become even more important when some of those new architectures are introduced.
Okay, and what is the evidence behind the projections to reach 30% of the market share by 2030? You showed evidence of the market flattening right now at 12%, but in 5 years, is
So
it going to rise up by 18%?
yeah, so one of the things is if you look at the curve, right, it's a very steep curve, right? And this is based on the fact that we expect the battery prices to come down, right? So the battery prices are around, if you look at 139, our 30% projection is based on battery prices at $100 per kilowatt hour by 27, 28, right? If that does not happen, right, then obviously we have scenario based model, right? um, if there are high battery prices, there's low EV infrastructure, limited model availability, you are looking at less than 25% penetration, right? So that's why it's we have different scenarios, and our base case is that the battery prices are going to actually come down. And if that does, on more models will be affordable models will be introduced, and there will be investment in EV infrastructure. And of course, there are mandates, right? I mean, there are mandates in California, there are mandates in some of the zero emission vehicle states, right? And those mandates are going to impact the cost of an EV, cost of an ICE vehicle also, right? Because OEMs will have to actually pay a penalty, right? So if they don't meet the target, right? So this is a scenario-based modeling. So 30% is based on that the battery prices are going to come down. They'll be closer to $100 per kilowatt hour by 2028, 2029. If that does not happen, then you probably won't see 30% penetration.
Okay, a few questions asking about this presentation. Yes, we will have it on apexshow.com later this week, the recording with this entire discussion. Another question for you, with the advancement of OTA, over-the-air updates, what happens if an OE car maker goes out of business?
Well, if OE car makers goes out of business, then obviously you don't have any warranty, and then you can forget about over-the-air updates, right? So, and that's a major concern, right, for some of the new. And we saw one of the automakers go out of the business, right? So.
Absolutely. So we have about 10 more minutes if anybody else has any other questions. Actually, a lot of thank you for answers. Thank you for presentations, great presentations. This has been a wonderful discussion on EVs.
And feel free to reach out if you have any additional questions. Here's my email, and I'm happy to answer any questions, any additional questions if you have those. So.
Perfect. Lots of thumbs ups. So very positive feedback. So I guess with that said, actually on behalf of AAPEX, I would like to thank you for your time today and a very informative presentation and discussion. I'd also like to thank our audience for your participation. As a reminder, this webinar will be available later this week at apexshow.com. as well as any other upcoming webinar details for next month and the next couple of months. Thank you all for your time. Actually, thank you again, and I hope everybody has a wonderful day.
Thank you.